All a bit of a mess at Man United, despite getting their new manager. 2 defeats in a row. Forest, of course, brilliant. They're up to 5th. The job really is getting bigger for Amorim, and maybe even bigger because, as we told you a little bit earlier, there's a developing story that Dan Ashworth, the sporting director at Man United, is leaving the club, which is astonishing. With Alex Crook, our chief football correspondent, he will be coming on the show at 9:30 to bring us up to date about that. And while Henry reels from the shock of Mr. Ashworth leaving, what about on the pitch, Henry? Let's just talk about the actual performances. There's 2 really to take into account, isn't there? There's a midweek defeat at Arsenal, and there's yesterday's sort of capitulation against Forest. 2-3 flattered them a bit.
Yeah, it did, and I mean this was arguably of the 2 was more alarming because it was pretty much their full strength team. You could argue that Luke Shaw, if he came in as a left wing back, but otherwise he had Lenny Yoro, he had De Ligt, Martinez. I mean, Alessandro Martinez is...
What was he doing on that goal?
You know what? When he came in, you just thought, Manchester United fans, understandably, were just sort of loving him, the butcher. He tackled, he could, distribute the ball, even though he wasn't the tallest. He had a spring in him. But he seems to have lost that spring, and the pace is an issue, whether it's he's being more exposed, having to sort of defend the channels in a back 3, or whether, there's some lingering issue with an injury. But I mean, I thought that was alarming, but it was mistakes all over. Bruno Fernandes giving the ball away, which ended up with Morgan Gibbs' White shot. Onana's mistakes on that. Shea Given was very good on Match of the Day last night from a goalkeeper's perspective, just sort of saying that his left leg was planted, he was moving to his right, and he couldn't respond, particularly when the ball sort of faded late. But there were individual battles. You look at Ryan Yates, Forest captain, in midfield. Okay, complete contrast to Bruno Fernandes, he's a fantastic player, good goal, but always flinging his arms around. He's not a natural leader. But Yates was there, absolute defiance, getting his blocks in, just an absolute fantastic leader. But you look at a player like Diogo Dalot, who's actually been okay for the last sort of 24 months or so. He was too diffident. I mean, Elliot Anderson for the 3rd goal. He was just... Elliot Anderson just wanted the ball more. So it's not a technical thing. It might be partly a tactical thing, but also it comes down to hunger, and Forrest wanted it more.
However, is there a bright light at the end of the tunnel? Because after the defeat, Amorim was defiant that his team can turn their fortunes around.
We already knew it. It will be a long journey, but we want to win. Because this is a massive club, and you feel it when you lose one game. It's really hard for everybody, and I can understand that. I can feel it in the stadium after the first goal. So we understand the context, but we have to keep in the same way, doing the same things, the same words that I have here with Everton. I have today. Continue focus on the performance. What we need to do, we need to improve on a lot of aspects of the game, and continue to do the same things tomorrow in training.
Yeah, Ruben Amorim says it's going to be a long road, but I'm just looking at some of the headlines in the papers. I picked out the Mail on Sunday here. Amorim caught in the eye of the storm. 2 defeats in 4 days. Honeymoon over for United boss. That didn't last long, did it?
Well, yeah, he's hardly out the church.
Goodness me.
The petals are still being thrown. No, look, you absolutely got to give him time because he's come in mid-season. He needs a pre-season to work even more on his sort of 3-4-2-1. He needs to address whether it's players going out on loan. Obviously, an element of that can be sorted in January. Will he necessarily be able to get the calibre of player in January? And also, what is the issue with who's going to be involved in the recruitment with Dan Ashworth leaving? So there are all those doubts there. Can I just say on one positive from Manchester United, I thought their emotional tributes from all over the ground, both sets of supports to Cath Phipps, because you would have met her going into the cliff, going into Carrington. The amazing receptionist, 55 years she worked at Manchester United, and I just thought that the tributes on the day, the black armbands, the tributes from players, past players,
and from Anthony Elanga as well.
Yeah, that was lovely.
Forest, it was
really
nice.
Who walked out with one of the wreaths. I just thought that football is incredibly caring and thoughtful. And I thought Manchester United deserve huge credit for the way they paid tribute to the great Cath Phipps, because she was a remarkable lady. I mean, even a sort of layman like me going into the training ground, she was always a sort of smiling face in reception. But the emotional tributes from current players, past players, was just were huge and absolutely heartfelt, because she was almost like a sort of mother figure to some of these younger players, as well as being the great organiser. So amazing tributes to the great Cath Phipps.
They were. What do you make of United now going forward? What does he have to do? You put great store on Mason Mount. This could be his thing. He could operate as one of 2 10s behind a striker. He started him in the week. Didn't yesterday.
No, but he seems to be sort of rotating them, whether that's to sort of give them a break, whether that's because he's unconvinced. Well, exactly. Whether that's, like sort of Rashford goes and scores 2 goals and then he's on the bench. I didn't quite understand that, and then Rashford plays in a slightly different position when he comes on. So I can understand why he wants to rotate, because he's having a look. He wants to see them in action before he sort of decides longer term. But they need to settle down. But as I say, that was at least 10 of those was his starting. Just on Mason Mount, the desire to see him do well is because he's had a wretched run with injuries. He is a good player. We saw that in a Champions League final with the pass to Kai Havertz, and I just think maybe he looks at this year or the end of this season as great possibility for him, because Thomas Tuchel, who knows him well, is coming into the English scene. Obviously, he's got to deliver first.
You say the same about Rashford, though, Henry. You say those same things about Rashford.
I think there's more of a door open. There's more of a door open for Mount with England than Rashford. I think so, yeah. Because obviously Tuchel knows it.
It's a point.
No, he's got to do it for Manchester United week in, week out. He's got to show his fitness, and he's got to prove he can play one of those number 10 roles, which I think he can. But you're very dismissive of a player who's been dogged by injury for the last few years.
I'm not really dismissive of it. It's never got going.
Do you not rate Mount?
Yeah, but...
You don't sound very convinced.
Well, I'm still to be convinced at Man United. Obviously, as you say, he has had injuries, but even when he wasn't injured, he hardly put his stamp on the place, did he?
Well, I think he presses hard. He's got a good work ethic. I think he's got a good pass on him. You could say he doesn't hurt teams, but we saw in the Champions League final. Look, I'm not saying he's elite, but
you can't keep going back to the Champions League final.
No, I'm just saying that there's obviously a talent in the player, and we haven't seen that, whether that's for injury, for consistency, a dip in form, whatever. But just don't throw players on the scrap heap.
There's a talented Marcus Rashford as well, but fans are waiting too long for that to develop further, and he's not a kid anymore, Neither is Mount.
No, I agree, but the point I make about Rashford is similar to Mount in terms of there is talent in there.
I fear for your next England squad if you're trying to get those 2 in at the moment. Anyway.
On AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.